Right. Okay, so yes, Shakira, over to you.
Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. And good evening or good morning to all of you, depending on the time zone in which you live, because there are always people in this meeting from all over the world. I am Shakira Mohammed of Trinidad and Tobago and a teacher for the past 14 years. This is our 124th edition of our Zoom public meeting. And we wish to sincerely thank all those who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora global project. So for 123 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. And in the past 2 years, 6 months and 2 weeks, we have featured over 414 presenters from all parts of the world, speaking on 123 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, which is a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. In order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are asking you to kindly give us your suggestions as well as donations. And you can contact Dr. Mahabir for further details. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator this evening or tonight is Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of this Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. She is a strong advocate for health and wellness practices based on traditional and alternative healing. Shalama, welcome. Please take over.
Thank you, Shakir. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for choosing to spend this part of your Sunday or your Monday morning with us. Ladies and gentlemen, this public meeting will take the usual form of a panel discussion followed by questions and answers. To avoid trolls, please be advised that our IT manager, Ravin Ram Singh, has muted everyone. He has given permission to the speakers only to share their screens. Speakers are advised not to admit anyone or unmute anyone or allow anyone to share your screens, please. The meeting should not exceed 2 hours, and today we're talking about Indians in the armed forces in the diaspora, disinterested or denied recruitment and promotion. So here's why we're talking about this. Coming from a long and sustained military tradition of Gurkhas and sepoys, why is it today that Indians in the diaspora comprise such small numbers in the police, army, navy, and coast guard in countries such as Trinidad, Guyana, and Suriname, where they constitute the majority population? Are they not interested in joining the armed forces? Or do they not receive fair and equal treatment in the recruitment and promotion process? Are the armed forces in the Indian diaspora, like those of the USA, where it was found recently that racism or discrimination against Blacks and coloreds is deep-rooted and festers stubbornly, despite repeated efforts to eradicate them? These are some of the questions that we hope to address today. So let's hear from our panel of distinguished speakers, and we want to begin with Naran Ganesh from South Africa. He's a Durban community activist and relentless human rights campaigner. He's the chair of the local civic association and is a global Indian series correspondent from South Africa. Welcome, Naran. You have 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all participants from throughout the world. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to make this disclaimer. Whether it's inherent or acquired, I am totally against warfare in any form, in any part of the world. And with that aside, I'd like to introduce how I'm going to do my presentation. I'm going to do it in 2 parts, which I think is important, and it gives us perspective. The first part, I will give the current situation in terms of the South African context, which is important because the involvement of the Indian citizen is very integral to South Africa. But in terms of the armed forces, we may have a problem. And I refer to that in terms of diversity. Now, managing diversity has become a major theme in the contemporary world, not least within the armed forces, which have not only become more diverse in terms of race and gender, but which are frequently deployed together with or within other nations. However, the manner in which the armed forces deal with diversity issues differ substantially, as they are largely influenced by the political, cultural, and ethnic influences emanating from the broader society. Yet, despite these differences, there are a number of universal reasons why diversity management has assumed greater political prominence in military affairs since the end of the Cold War. Now, South Africa, prior to 1994, that is, before it became a democracy, was, as the world knows, controlled by white South Africa. It was the so-called apartheid regime. And the prerogative of the South African Defense Force at that time, as it was known, the SADF, was that mainly of whites. Non-whites, that would include Indians, blacks, and coloreds, as they were racially classified in terms of that constitution, were minimal in number. Now, the South African population in terms of Indians is about 1.3 million out of a population of about 56 to 58 million South Africans. And the diversity, the new change when it came in 1994, changed the South African Defense Force into the South African National Defense Force. And it integrated the SADF with the people coming from the African National Congress fighters part, which is called Mkonto Isizwe, and they were integrated into the system of the SANDF. Now, while in most countries, the management of diversity has meant accommodating minorities, in South Africa, this has involved the integration of the majority Black population into a minority white-dominated workplace. And this was because of years of discrimination denied many Blacks access to certain jobs and sectors of society, including the military. Now, the Indian community in South Africa was pretty stoic in many respects. The military was not a vocational choice, first choice, let me put it that way. So their involvement in the South African system or the current military is pretty minimal. In fact, if I am open to correction here, there's only about 1,000, just under 1,000 Indian personnel in the South African Defense Force, which is a serious problem. But managing diversity has become a problem because all these issues have complicated diversity management in the South African National Defense Force. And it would be important to note that the constitution speaks to the previously disadvantaged, but in South Africa, whilst Blacks, Coloreds, and Indians were so-called previously disadvantaged, it is predominantly the Black that is given preference. So one of the main problems that, or the underlying problems in terms of joining the military in South Africa is that most middle and upper management aspects are Black dominated. And that in itself, creates a problem because managing diversity is a multifaceted concept and it embraces the recognition and value of cultural diversity. However, the problem with many managing diversity initiatives is that they often reinforce underlying stereotypes by focusing on national or ethnic culture and not on the relevance of cultural differences that can improve cultural knowledge. So South Africa, when the change came and when the South African National Defense Force started its role as the bedrock of defense of the country, it obviously experienced a lot of problems. And that's basically where we remain. There doesn't seem to be any aspect of progress in terms of the racial bias that has come about as a result of our freedom and democracy, which is quite ironical because our constitution speaks to we the people, and speaks to equality and justice and stuff like that. But unfortunately, or largely as a result of the government's assertive affirmative action policies, the South African Armed Forces, while for the first time in history is broadly representative of society, but not totally. The targets set by the Defense Review in 1996 have been exceeded, according to the South African Defense Force, National Defense Force. There is a national commitment to promote not only racial, but also gender equality. And this has added a new dimension to diversity management in the SADF, whereas the focus on correcting the past racial imbalances, in recent years, the shift has been on improving gender representation, not only in terms of numbers, but also across all branches, including combat branches. However, getting the numbers right means nothing if those representing the numbers are not valued and respected. And that's critical. Although many women now serve in traditionally male-dominated branches, they have not reached a sufficient critical mass to be fully accepted as equals, nor has the unique contribution that they make can be fully endorsed. This may change in the future as the SANDF gender and mainstreaming initiatives take hold. But for the time being, we are in limbo, as I would like to see it. And while the SANDF has made great steps in removing racial and gender discrimination and improving its legitimacy among the broader populace, this has come at a price. The exodus, for example, of a number of experienced white South African National Defense officers before their skills could be adequately transferred has evoked concern. Yet, at the same time, the AA, which is the affirmative action, continues to alienate and frustrate many whites, including Indians, including colored citizens of the country, who remain clustered in the middle ranks of the Defense Force. And despite their loyalty and long-term experience, they recognize that political experience counts more when it comes to appointments and promotions. And that I find is going to be a problem in terms of integrating the Defense Force into a racially or a demographically representative aspect of South Africa. This sense of alienation has left many disillusioned, demoralized, even resentful. And, that's going to be a problem going ahead in terms of making the Defense Force an entity that can be representative of the country. Now, the truth is, for some, diversity management may be a soft issue in terms of defense priorities, but it could have hard consequences for the South African National Defense Force. Not only does a lack of sensitivity to diversity issues increase misconceptions leading to underperformance, discrimination, ill discipline, and poor work relations, but it also affects the operational effectiveness and legitimacy of the armed forces. Should the SANDF become unrepresentative and should leadership continue to comprise of party loyalists, then there is some unease over the long-term impact this may have for civil-military relations and political stability of South Africa. And if we take recent events in Zimbabwe, and our own apartheid legacy should be sufficient warning for us to take diversity management more seriously. And this includes the South African Indian as such. I'd like to now look at the role of the Indians in South Africa in terms of armed forces that came during wars previously. Now, the forgotten men of the Indian Army left the imprint in a suburb called Observatory in Johannesburg during the early 1900s. And although their story has been largely forgotten and lost to public memory, a monument at the summit of the Observatory Ridge honors their memory. And this Indian monument stands as a memorial to Indians who fell in the Anglo-Boer War, the South African War of 1899 to 1902. And, it's important to look at that history because it it reflects where we were once and where we are now. Now, these Indian men, although fully fledged troops of the Indian Army, were ordered to act in an ostensibly non-combatant role during the Anglo-Boer War, serving as what we called auxiliaries or followers. The Johannesburg Memorial raised in their honor has been noted as the only monument to non-combatants under military service who fell on foreign soil in this region. And to the north of the monument overlooks the valley where Indians set up camp during the war and where a group of their comrades were buried in the aftermath of the conflict. And, you know, when I look at this, it was something that really touched me because the role of the Indian in armed forces in wars gone by has largely been forgotten, because as the Indian subcontinent was under British rule, regiments of the British Army provided a garrison in South Africa alongside the Indian Army from, I think it was 1858. And although no army regiments took part in the Anglo-Boer War, volunteers from these regiments, which were referred to as the Indian Army auxiliaries, participated in supportive roles. And that's critical. They participated in supportive roles. They were not active combatants in the wars. And the regiment from the Indian subcontinent that were set to fight in the Anglo-Boer War were regular regiments of the British Army stationed in India. It is important also to note that whereas little information has been made known in South Africa of the role of the Indian Army auxiliaries during the Anglo-Boer War, the distinguished service of Gandhi and his Natal Indian Ambulance Corps has, by comparison, attracted much attention worldwide. Gandhi's Ambulance Corps was, however, disbanded early in the war, and I think it was at the end of February 1900, when the British were able to take the offensive with large reinforcements and relieve the siege of Ladysmith. Now, Ladysmith is a town in the hinterland of the province of KwaZulu-Natal, in which I reside in, and there's a history associated with the siege of Ladysmith. And the Natal Indian Ambulance Corps, numbering, I think it was just over 1,000 men, served for only 2 months, whereas the Indian Army auxiliaries were far greater in number, and many served throughout the war. And there were international contingents as well. Far from being purely a South African conflict, the war of 1899 to 1902 soon became an international encounter involving Canadians, Russians, Americans, Swedes, and others. For all that, British troops drawn from garrisons in India were greater in number than those of the foreign contingents from colonies such as Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, with only the British homeland supplying more troops than India. And reinforcements from the British colonies or dominions comprised a combined total of just over 30,000 officers and men, and about 337,000 came from Britain itself. And that's an interesting point in terms of the involvement of India as well in armed forces throughout the world. Many accounts have been published on the role of contingents from Australia, Canada, and other countries that took part in the Anglo-Boer War. Their sacrifices have inspired war memorials scattered throughout the world. Comparatively, little research has, however, appeared on the Indian contingent, which was the first to arrive after the outbreak of the war and became the largest of all foreign forces brought to reinforce the British garrison in South Africa. In general, the role of the native Indian component of the Indian Army has often been neglected by researchers. But I recall there was an Indian scholar, Dr. T.G. Ramamurthy, who was a notable exception and had done much work in terms of the research. Now, if we look at remount camps, Indian auxiliaries were employed as hospital staff, horse trainers, transport drivers, cooks, water carriers, laundrymen, and in all non-combatant roles. Though reluctant to bring in native troops as combatants, the War Office in Britain made repeated requests for veterinary, health, and equestrian establishment, leading to several native contingents being dispatched to South Africa. And the breaking in of training horses was among the main functions of the Indian auxiliaries, second only to stretcher bearing. And faced by highly mobile Boer commanders on ponies, the later British campaigns under, I think it was Lord Roberts, was forced to rely increasingly on cavalry and especially on mounted infantry. So the involvement of the Indian South African is critical in terms of a war that was considered to be between the British and the Afrikaner. The Afrikaner is being the Afrikaans being a language, and the Afrikaner are descendants of that language. So the Indian citizen did play a role, as much as they were not totally involved in active combat. You know, most of them were non-commissioned officers, if I remember correctly. And this is what entrenched their contribution to the armed forces at the time. Many of the Indian auxiliaries, though not all, returned to India following the end of the war, never to form part of South African society again. In this sense, reviving their memory may not fit nearly within the narrow conception of South African nation building. It remains nonetheless important to acknowledge the varied, the multiracial and transnational elements which have shaped South African history. Actors in this complex and composite history include not only South African mainstream, local minorities and immigrant populations, but includes also non-South Africans who have come, left their mark as an enduring presence on the historical landscape and have gone from the country's shores. Now, you know, I'd like to concentrate just a minute or two on the last part before I conclude. After the close of the war, of the South African Anglo-Boer War, a few, at least of the Indian Army soldiers remained in South Africa, who became absorbed into the Indian community and more broadly into the continuing stream of South African history. And drawn from these veterans from the British Indian Army, there was a Captain Nawab Khan and Sumandar Khan, who were amongst those who participated in the seminal movement led by Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa from 1906 to 1914. And it was important, Gandhi did represent them in I think it was in 1908, Captain Khan stood trial in Johannesburg along with his fellow ex-soldier Sumandar Khan, a veteran of the Anglo-Boer War. And I think he had about 30 years of military service in the Indian Army. And they were accused of refusing to register under the Transvaal Asiatic Registration Act, Transvaal being one of the provinces in apartheid South Africa. And the two were defended in court by Mahatma Gandhi in his role as an attorney. So, you know, it was quite an interesting aspect of the involvement in South Africa. And finally, you know, the prominent resistant figure was Captain Nawab Khan, who brought a long military tradition to Gandhi's non-violent satyagraha, you know, the truth force movement of the early 1900s. He was the son of a major killed in the Second Afghan War, and he joined the army at the age of 13. So their involvement was integral, if not vital, to the wars that took place on South African soil. And when we contrast that to current day South Africa in terms of the political infrastructure that has happened, you know, one would have expected that with the advent of democracy and freedom, the horizon would have changed. In fact, in my candid opinion, it has darkened because everything has gone black. And very few people are afraid to say that because, you know, we want to be politically correct. We don't want to disturb the status quo. But the reality is that it has. And the Indian citizen of South Africa is very, very reluctant to want to join the military services, the armed forces, whether it's the Navy, the Army, or the medical corps. So at the end of the day, it's disturbing, it's sad, but it's a reality. And I'm not sure how it's going to be fixed, because the idea of affirmative action and employment equity has overtaken the premise of our constitution, which is we, the people. And I'd like to conclude by saying that, as I said in the beginning, I'm inherently opposed to any war. I never wished that there were armed forces, but that's the reality of the world. And my heart goes out to the people of Ukraine who are suffering under the siege of a so-called special military operation by Russia. And to all Hindus celebrating Diwali next week, a happy and pleasant Diwali to them all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Narend. That was a very informative presentation. We have a better understanding of where South African Indians stand in the armed forces there. And I hope you'll be around to take some questions from the audience. Yes? Great.
Yes,
Thank you very much. Thank you. So let's take our second speaker now. And this is Professor Vijay Naidu from Fiji. Professor Naidu is a professor and director of development studies at the University of the South Pacific. He has written extensively on ethnicity, human security, and military coups in Fiji. So I want to thank you very much for your patience. You have 20 minutes. Go ahead, please. Do you want to start your PowerPoint?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Sure, you can go ahead. I understand that you will be showing it yourself.
No, right.
Okay.
No, we got the wrong one.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair and Moderator. And I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Kumar Mahabir for the invitation to participate in this panel discussion. And my topic is Fijians of Indian descent and the Republic of Fiji military forces. So moving on to the next slide, please. The question of the topic, Indians in the armed forces in the Indian diaspora, disinterested or denied, suggests relative absence of low numbers of Indians in armed forces or former colonies of Indian indentured labor migration and settlement. And Mr. Ganesh's presentation on South Africa reinforces that. In the case of Fiji, I argue that we had systematic discrimination, and over time, this has resulted in disinterest. And also, there has been a major demographic transition in Fiji. And so the lower numbers of Indo-Fijians mean that the potential pool of Indo-Fijians have declined. By way of background, Fiji is a multi-ethnic society of an estimated population of less than 1 million people, with indigenous Fijians comprising 60%, Indo-Fijians about 34%, and people of other ethnicities 6%. The Republic of Fiji military forces, formerly the Royal Fiji military forces, comprises of more than 3,000 regulars and 6,000 reservists or territorials, and probably less than 30 of this number are of Indian descent. Because of the ethnically blind policies followed by the current government, ethnic breakdown is not given of the military. Fiji has had 4 military coups, and 3 were basically anti-Indian political actions by the military. And since 2014, as Professor Stewart Firth points out, we have democracy by military permission. Next slide, please. So the Fiji military forces is a bit like a Jekyll and Hyde character. So on the one hand, it has got a great repute as international peacekeepers, predominantly ethnic Fijians. And in this slide, I've got the current commander of the military forces, a Itoke gentleman by the name of Koloniwai. And in this post, there is largely ethnic Fijians who are peacekeepers, but on my left-hand side, you have an Indo-Fijian infantry person undergoing training. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So while internationally we are renowned peacekeepers, within the country, the Fiji military forces has got notoriety because of the coups that it has carried out. So over the last 35 years, we have had 4 coups. And these images capture, the coup related aspects of, the Fiji military. So in 1987, May 87, we had the first coup carried out by the military, third person in the military, the name of Siddhiveni Rambuka. And then in 2000, George Speight and some of his renegade soldiers of the military attempted another coup, which was followed by the real coup. And then again in 2006, we had Baini Marama, who features in the Guardian article, having carried out another coup. So we have always had an armed force in Fiji, and armed forces have always been ethnic Fijian. So we had an armed native constabulary to pacify indigenous resistance and to back up protests and strike actions by grenadiers and their descendants. The present military actually originates in the Second World War, when the British decided to form the army, and it was left to the New Zealand military to establish it. There was a divide and rule policy here in Fiji, like in other colonies, and there was a very deliberate policy to keep Indians out. There was talk of Indian problem, and this related to the fact that Indians sought social and political equality in the colony of Fiji. And with respect to the military, they demanded that they get the same pay and the same color of uniforms as whites, and this was not accepted. In addition, the colonial sugar refinery, which had the majority of tenants and contract farmers, discouraged people of Indian ethnicity from joining the military. In contrast to the Indian response, on the direction of the chiefs, indigenous Fijians, so Itoke, volunteered in large numbers and form obviously the predominant majority of the military and labor corps. They served in the Solomon Islands during the Second World War and in the Malaysian insurgency in the 1950s. Change of slide, please. So at that time, during the Second World War, Indians were interested in joining the war effort, and they formed a volunteer brigade in the province of Rewa, but this was disbanded by the colonial administration. And they contributed very generously to the British war effort. Over time, the Fiji military became a racialized institution led by white men and by ethnic Fijian chiefs. So it became an ethnic Fijian institution in a multi-ethnic society. And there were practices that actually discriminated against people of Indian origin. So in terms of physical attributes, they were larger. Ethnic Fijians are physically larger people. And so the criteria basically used debarred people who were Indo-Fijians. Christianity is the centerpiece of the Fiji military forces in terms of the beliefs and values of the majority. And although Hindus don't eat beef and Muslims don't eat pork, these were served. And if these minorities couldn't eat the food, then that was too bad. Linguistically, the ethnic Fijian army uses the Bawan lingua franca, which is again very different from the Fiji Hindustani that Indo-Fijians use. We change the slide, please. So, please, next slide, please.
Praveen.
So after the 1987 September coup, the Royal Fiji Military Forces were renamed the Republic of Fiji Military Forces. It's interesting, the post-independence background of the military. So from a few hundreds in the 1970s, very symbolic, using obsolete weapons. From 1978 onwards, Fiji got involved in the United Nations Peacekeeping Department. And since then, the numbers expanded very rapidly with the peacekeeping duties in the Lebanon, and later on Sinai, and eventually to more than a dozen countries where conflicts were taking place. More than 50 Fiji troops lost their lives in peacekeeping efforts in these other parts of the world. As I said earlier on, currently the Fiji military forces has 3,500 regulars and more than 6,000 reservists and 300 plus naval division personnel. And all these things, 99% of them are of ethnic Fijian origins. Change of slide, please, Praveen.
Robin, change slides, please.
So our former Prime Minister and at that time the leader of the opposition, Mr. Mahendra Chaudhry, in August 2005, questioned the small number of Indo-Fijians in the Fiji military forces. The explanation given by one of the commanding officers of the military was that not many people of Indian origins applied to be recruited as soldiers in the military. And because promotions took a long time and it was slow, many of them left to join other careers. And this meant that the numbers were not very large. And in 2007, when they gave figures of the number of people of Indian descent in the army, the figure was only 15, which is abysmally small. And currently, as I said, ethnic minorities, including Indo-Fijians, comprise less than 1% of the military. It's interesting that in 2016 to 2017, there was a major drive to recruit women to comply with a UN requirement relating to gender of peacekeepers. And the UN Department of Peacekeeping requires that a minimum of 10% of the peacekeepers be women. And so special recruitment measures were taken, and there were facilities built for the women, and a considerable number of indigenous Fijians women applied. And the target was that they have at least 100 Fijian women. I don't think that figure was reached, but I would argue that currently the number of women actually outnumber the number of people of Indian descent in the military. And unfortunately, there have never been such enhanced effort to recruit and retain Indo-Fijians and other minorities in the military. In saying so, I'd also like to say that about 20 secondary schools in Fiji have cadet training, and most of these are multi-ethnic, and it could be a very useful way of recruiting young Indo-Fijians into the military, but I don't think that option has really been taken. Next slide, please, Ravin. So they have always been a small number of Indo-Fijians in the military in the post-independence period. And I'd like to mention two of them, one of whom actually became the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of Staff of the Republic of Fiji Military Forces. And he is Brigadier General Muhammad Aziz, who served in the military for 35 years of service. And he is a lawyer by profession and headed the military's legal department, and was responsible for prosecuting the mutineers who tried to assassinate the current Prime Minister of Fiji, who was then the commander of the military forces. Brigadier General Aziz left the military forces last year and is currently a professor of law at the University of Fiji. And the next person that I want to speak about is a much younger man. If you can change the slide, please. Rabin. So it came to the attention of the Fiji public that a Lieutenant Colonel Avnish Kumar was the commanding officer for 300 peacekeepers in the Senai. And the Fiji Sun, which is one of the two dailies in Fiji, titled its article with the caption, "For the first time, an Indo-Fijian will command the Republic of Fiji Military Forces battalion on international peacekeeping duties. Lieutenant Colonel Avnish Kumar has been appointed commanding officer of the 2nd Infantry Battalion." So this young man is very well qualified. He's got a master's degree from Massey University in New Zealand, and is trained in New Zealand, Australia, India, Bangladesh, and Malaysia, and has served in Iraq, Sinai, Syria, and East Timor. So it seems to me that if, next slide please, Ravin, if Indo-Fijians in the military persevere and stay on in the military, there are opportunities for promotion, as can be seen by these two military persons of Indian origins.
Praveen, next slide, please.
This is an image of Lieutenant Colonel Avinash Kumar with his mother, his father having passed away when he was a little child. So he acknowledged the debt of gratitude that he has to his mother. We move on. The next slide, please. It's the final slide, I think. Raveen, thank you. So from Muhammad Aziz and Avinash Kumar's cases, it is apparent that Fijians of Indian descent who persevere with their military careers can ascend the ranks of the military and actually have, very senior positions. Here's a research topic for, potential postgraduate students, and which is to inquire from these senior officers, about how they navigated the challenge of being so successful in what has been primarily an ethnic Fijian and Itoke institution. An interesting topic for future research. I've got a couple of other slides that indicate my sources for people who might Fiji military forces. Thank you very much, moderator. That brings to my.
Thank you, Professor Naidu. That was a very, very insightful presentation. I think we very often don't get these details about Fiji, and for you to have covered it so widely, really, really appreciate it. So I'm looking forward to you being here. I'm hoping we'll be able to take some questions at the end of all the presentations. Is that okay with you?
I will. Thank you very much. I'll stay home. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our third speaker is Lieutenant Colonel Bob Mangal of Suriname. He's the Chief of General Staff at the Ministry of Defense in Suriname. He's a graduate of China Army Commanding College and has been trained in Brazilian jungle fighting. So Robin will show his video presentation, please. Robin?
Marvin is facing a little challenge with the internet, so please bear with him.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Marvin, so we have to show the video now. Yeah.
It's still seeing Professor Naidu's presentation.
Yes. Do you want me to send the? You have it, Shalima. Maybe you can show it. If maybe stock is frozen on the internet.
Yeah. Let me see if I can.
Yeah. And maybe you may have to show the rest of the slides because he has some internet issues.
Okay.
Because
ladies and gentlemen, you all need to forgive us. Today, we had some inclement weather just as we were going to start the program. And so I believe that that is interfering with the internet. Okay, let me see. Oh, it's a WeTransfer.
yeah. Okay, I think. Okay, Ravin, if you can show the video now. Whoever gets it first, Shalima or him.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever gets the video to show first.
Yeah, mine is downloading.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's taking up some time. Okay, so it's
Yeah,
interesting that the
okay.
Fijian situation downloading.
Right. I think I haven't got it.
Unfortunately,
Sorry
it's
about that.
taking up some
Yeah.
time. Okay, so it's interesting that the
Okay.
Fijian situation downloading.
Right. I think I haven't got it.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to salute Dr.
Okay, so it's interesting that the
Mahabir
Fijian
and
situation
all those
downloading.
other diaspora
Right. I think
attendants.
I haven't got it.
It's a great
Good
honor
afternoon.
for me today, especially when I received the invitation for
I
participation
think both of you
in
both of you
the
are
global
both of you are
Indian
sharing
diaspora
screen or something.
platform
There's an
that
echo.
my Indian root brothers and sisters for me today. Although I have been adapted to my regions,
I think both of you are
I am
both of you are sharing screen
still
or something.
connected
There's an echo.
with the dispersity of Indians scattered all over the globe. Although I have let me first to my regions,
I think both of you are
I am
both of you are sharing
still
screen or something.
connected
There's an echo.
with the dispersity
Mine isn't even
of
downloaded
Indians
as yet, so I think
scattered all
Robin
over
has
the globe.
two
Although I
computers
have
up.
referred to my regions,
I think both of you are
I am
both of you are sharing screen
still
or something.
connected with the dispersity
Mine isn't even downloaded as yet, so I think Robin has two computers up.
to my regions.
I think both of you are
I am
both of you are sharing
still
screen or something.
connected with the dispersity.
Mine isn't even downloaded as yet, so I think Robin has two computers up.
First, introduce myself.
I think both of you are
I'm a native Dutch speaker. My
Mine
name
isn't
is
even downloaded
Pop
as yet, so I think
Krishnarat
Robin has two
Mangal.
computers up.
Mangal is my family name, and I am a member of the Suriname Defense Force in the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, and my actual position is Chief of General Staff. And in 1984, I entered the armed forces, and as an NCO, I was specialized in the Suriname Air Force with air traffic control and meteorology. In 1992, I successfully graduated from my basic officer school, and in 2003, I was transferred to the Army and started a different career. In 2007, I went to the People Republic of China and attended the Army Commanding College. And there I had my advanced officer formation. In 2015, I graduated with a master's title in public administration, accredited by the Dutch Erasmus University. The positions I hold, especially the key positions I will mention in public administration, only two. The first one is that I became the director of the ex-military Reintegration Foundation, and the second appointment was that I also became the first director of the Suriname Military Academy, and also a lecturer. Viewing my military education and training history, I can mention that I am also a qualified Green Beret and sniper, also a lecturer as an Indian in Diaspora within the Defense Force. I want to enlighten my Indian side. Also, as descendant of Indian immigrants, my ancestors came all the way from the area in India called Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. This is the northern region of India. They were dropped after the abolition of the slavery in 1863 called in a Dutch-speaking country on remote locations in rural areas with zero provisions. On arrival, they had to survive, while simultaneously they had to deal with hard labor and harsh Dutch plantation masters. According to the British Immigration Register, I could have traced back that they have been placed on a plantation in the district of Commonwealth called the Morgenster. This means the morning star. But actually, they never saw a glimpse of a morning star, but only mosquitoes, bilharzia, and contaminated water. No access to well-being or good quality of life. After the mandatory period, contract period of 10 years, for those who survived, many stayed while others went back to India. The ancestors who stayed received a starting capital and a piece of land from the government to grow their own crops and also to own cattle for the production of milk. I want to thank them today because by the strength of them, I was educated in norms and values in culture, in cuisine, in traditions, and also they kept my heritage of my Indian being within the society. They provide me with food and school, and they support me.
Okay, you all, we do apologize for that. The technical glitch really has significantly affected us. That's very, very unfortunate. Maybe we can bring him back after. At this point in time, I want us to move on, please, to our fourth speaker, and this is Professor Joan Mars of the USA, who's originally from Guyana. Professor Mars is an attorney and an associate professor at the University of Michigan, Flint. She's the author of the book entitled Deadly Force, Colonialism and the Rule of Law, Police Violence in Guyana. Welcome, Professor Mars. You have 20 minutes.
I think she has some issues too with the technology. So either you or Ravin would show
no, well, I don't think Robin can show her PowerPoint because he's having significant difficulties.
So can you I sent it to you, so can you show it and she will just talk because she can't even turn on her video. I emailed it to you. I emailed it to you, but I can do it again.
Oh, can you show it?
Hold on.
I'm searching, but I'm not seeing it.
I'll send it to you again. Hold on. Just bear with me.
Oh, good. Professor Mars?
Yes, I can get it, but I'll have to leave the Zoom. You probably wouldn't be able to hear me.
Let's take Professor George Dans, and we'll come back to you. Meanwhile, I will email
I could start it because I have most of it here. So if
go ahead and start, please. Yeah, go ahead and start it, please.
Put up your version of it, you know, but I can remember what I did. Okay, so I just want to thank you for the invitation to participate in this discussion, which is a very timely topic. I wanted to start my discussion with I hope everybody can see the slides. You can't see the slides, right? I wanted to show you that there is diversity in the Guyana Police Force. So we found some pictures with officers of high rank, such as the recent Commissioner of Police who just resigned, and women who are the recent Commissioner Silal Pasad is an East Indian, and it appears as if some of these officers are either of mixed race or also East Indian. So I'm sorry you can't see the slides right now. Can I share my screen and allow you to see it? Because I can bring it up in my, but then I will be out of the Zoom if I do that. If I bring it up in my Word.
Go ahead, please. Professor Mars?
So this is the first time we are facing all this this hiccups.
We're not even hearing her.
Yeah.
I'm downloading her presentation, and let me see if I can get it.
But we can't even get her sound.
Okay, so let's just give her a second. Okay. Well, we're not getting her now at all.
Oh, so
Okay. Can you please sort that out and let us bring on our next speaker meanwhile?
yes.
Okay, I'll do that. So unfortunately, you all please bear with us.
We have never had this before.
Yes, and we do have an excellent presenter next. This is Professor George Dans of the USA, originally from Guyana also. He's a professor of sociology at the University of North Georgia and a former dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of Guyana. Professor Dans is the author of the book entitled Domination and Power in Guyana, a study of the police in a third world context. Welcome, Professor Dans. I hope you are able to share your PowerPoint.
No, he doesn't have a PowerPoint, thankfully.
Yes, I opted not to have a PowerPoint. But,
wonderful, wonderful. Please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much to your organization for inviting me to do this presentation. I haven't done anything on the military and police for quite a bit. I've done extensive research on the military and the police in the Caribbean. And I was very impressed indeed and enlightened to listen to Narendra Ganesh from South Africa, Vijay Naidu from Fiji, and noted some of the striking similarities between the way Indians are unequally treated as it relates to the military in these countries and the similarities in Guyana. Sorry I didn't get a chance to hear Bob Mangel's presentation, or Professor Mars, Ajul Mars from Guyana. I was told I have 12 minutes, and I wasn't surprised because two of us are presenting from Guyana. So let me begin. From its earliest formations to contemporary times, the armed forces in Guyana have historically been characterized by ethnic divisions in recruitment and promotion. These ethnic divisions serve the needs, first, of the colonial state system, and subsequently, the post-colonial state system, to maintain public order and to preserve ruling class interests. The locus of power in both colonial and post-colonial societies is found within the centralized state apparatus. The paramilitary police and armed forces are the coercive arms of the state system, and these reflect relations between the rulers and ruled, the dominant and the dominated, and the use and abuse of power. The police in Guyana were established in 1839 after the emancipation of slaves in 1838. The abolition of slavery created a politically free proletariat who were recalcitrant to working on the plantations, except on their own terms. White planters were fearful for their lives. The commencement of importation of indentured labor comprising Portuguese from Portugal and the Azores Islands, Chinese from China, and East Indians from India also occasioned the establishment of the police. Policing was dictated by a necessity of the colonial state to conquer and subjugate and exploit the colonized in the interests of the mother country, Britain, and the white planter and merchant classes and settlers. Policing functioned to protect and serve white racial capitalism in Guyana, as indeed elsewhere across the British Empire. To ensure the loyalty of the police, their ranks were not initially recruited from among the local population. Police were recruited from immigrants from Barbados and other West Indian countries. The officer corps of the police and armed forces were exclusively white and from England. The non-commissioned officers derived from other European countries, Suriname, and also Africa. By 1883, for example, there were 246 privates in the force were Barbadian, as opposed to 161 Guyanese. Local recruits were not allowed to serve in their communities of origin. Including the colonized in the armed forces was a leap of faith and a leap of necessity. The white population, who were immigrants and transients, comprised less than 3% of the population of British Guyana. After slavery was abolished, police stations were set up mainly in Black communities to monitor the activities of the emancipated population who came off the sugar plantations and settled in villages. This pattern has prevailed in a post-colonial Guyana. In the absence of a resident army, the paramilitary police force in the colony had the premier responsibility to maintain law and order. East Indians were confined to the plantations as indentured laborers, and strikes by Indian population, Indian plantation workers, and other industrial protests were violently put down by the police. East Indians were initially not allowed to join the police. They were also strongly dissuaded from joining the civil service, becoming teachers, moving to the towns to restrict them as a captive labor on the sugar plantations. Dr. Cherry Jagan, after graduating from Queen's College, could not find a job in the capital city of Georgetown because he was East Indian. Even after restrictions were lifted, East Indians in Guyana were kept out of the armed forces because of their height and their size and public policies of discouragement. Further, they were reportedly marked cultural aversions to joining the armed forces. After the 1964 riots in Guyana, race riots, the International Commission of Jurists reported that, or found that in order to join the force, males had to be 5'8", females 5'4". Their weight, males had to be at least 135 pounds. Age, between the ages of 18 and 30 years. Their chest, and these are just the men, 34 inches. They have to be unmarried and be between the ages of 18 to 25 years. These requirements as to height and chest measurements automatically excluded a large number of Indians who, as a race at the time, were smaller than the Africans. The requirement that recruits should normally be unmarried militated against East Indians who customarily got married at younger ages than the Africans. The screening of applications and interviewing of applicants is done almost entirely by Africans. The Board of Police Officers, which conducts the final interview, consists of 2 Africans and 1 person of mixed race. The Indians, who were largely Hindus, have to comply with religious dietary laws, which are not always easy to follow when living in barracks. Hindus don't want to eat meat, and Muslims don't want to eat pork and have other dietary restrictions. Though we were assured that the catering takes account of the Indians' dietary needs, the fear that they will be unable to keep the commandments of their faith does appear to be a discouraging factor for East Indians. And this was the International Commission of Jurists. The ICJ concluded, and I quote, "We found that the Indians who suffered more than any other racial group in the disturbances of 1964 have in many cases lost confidence in the police, and that they tend to look on the force as an African-dominated body that failed to protect them in an emergency," unquote. The ICJ highlighted historical ethnic imbalances in the armed forces, but never once stated that the British colonial government was responsible. And this is key. The British colonial government ingrained that from day one. Every time ethnic tensions boiled up in Guyana between the major race groups, the ethnic imbalances in the armed forces became seen as an elephant in the room. The British government, however, never fully relied on nor trusted its own police force to maintain law and order. And it issued a decree to suspend the British Guiana Constitution in 1953 and removed Dr. Chelly Jagan, democratically elected socialist-inclined PUP government, out of office. They sent in British soldiers, the Coldstream Guards. The majority Indian population in Guyana supported the socialist Chelly Jagan, who was viewed as a serious threat to racial capitalism in Guyana. It was therefore highly unlikely that the British would have encouraged East Indians enrolling in and being promoted in the police force and armed forces in the colony. As the British were leaving and Guyana was destined to become independent in 1965, they created the Special Services Unit, the SSU, and that had an equal amount of Indians and equal amount of Blacks. And the officer corps of that entity were trained at Sandhurst and performed exceptionally well. They were truly excellent officers, both Indians and Blacks. Both the British and American governments conspired to keep Chelly Jagan and the PUP out of government for many years to avoid Guyana becoming a communist country. Recruitment and promotion of Indians in the armed forces suffered. Consequently, Burnham's PNC, which governed an independent Guyana for 28 years, starting from 1964, sought to build a viable, racially united nation. Yet, that government appeared to have continued the policy of marginalization of Indians from the armed forces. The paradox of ethnic imbalances in the armed forces in Guyana is that such imbalances originated under and persisted throughout the colonial era, and now also under post-colonial national governments. Successive PPP governments and successive TNC governments, which alternated in power, have ruled Guyana and controlled the armed forces without displaying fundamental willingness to address ethnic imbalances in these institutions. The paradox of ethnic imbalances in the armed forces must be compared in relation to, or be seen in relation to, the paradox of ethnic imbalances in the prison system in Guyana, and indeed in other areas of national life. A majority of Guyana's population are East Indians, but the majority of the armed forces are Black. A majority of the Guyana police are Black, yet the majority of the country's prison population are Black. A majority of Guyana's police force are Black. Yes, I already said that. Blacks are also overrepresented among citizens killed by the police, a dominantly Black police. There are no known efforts by the Black-dominated armed forces in Guyana to overthrow an Indian-led government. A Turkish proverb stated, quote, "When the axe came into the forest, the tree said, 'The handle is made from one of us.'" And that axe is the police as an institution. I would like to end by saying that the armed forces in our societies are our kith and kin, whether it's Fiji, South Africa, Guyana, Trinidad, Suriname. That is who they are. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. That was very, very, again, informative, excellent presentation. First time that we've actually been able to hear it assessed in this way. The majority in that Guyanese police force, Black, majority prisoners also Black. And so the armed force is taking care of people of their own ethnicity, whether they are doing crime or not. But at the same time, the Indians, you know, we have to question what's happening with them and how they feel being in a Black-dominated police situation. But thank you very much for that presentation and for coming in when you did, unscheduled as it is. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks. And ladies and gentlemen, we are going to bring on another speaker from South Africa who was not scheduled to come in, and this is Mr. Vinesh Selvan. Mr. Selvan, I'm trying to find your bio data. I do have the information. Unfortunately, I can't seem to locate it right now. I realize that your mic is unmuted. Would you mind saying hello, please?
Hi, good day, and thank you for the opportunity. I just got a message late this afternoon that you'd like me to come onto the show.
Yes,
if it's
thank
okay
you.
with everybody, I would just like to share a little bit of the history of South Africa, of Indians in South Africa.
Terrific. Mr. Selvan, would you be sharing a PowerPoint?
Yes, I'm doing that now.
Yes, terrific. Thank you.
Okay, let me go back on the.
We are seeing it clearly.
Okay, all right. Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Okay. My name is Vinesh Selvan. I'm an ex-Air Force aircraft technician, and I left the Air Force about after 12 years of service. I've since founded together with other individuals, we founded the South African Indian Legion, and that was to research and document the South African military history.
Mr. Selvan, would you mind just speaking a little louder, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to go quickly. Okay, I'll just cover quickly the origins of the Indians in South Africa. A lot of the people are under the impression that the Indians arrived in South Africa in 1860 with the indentured laborer contracts, but actually we arrived here in 1652, most of which were as slaves. Some were simply kidnapped from India, and others were lured with work opportunities and then sold into slavery once they reached the South African shores. Okay, the first group of Indians that came from India. India was colonized by the British, and the British used the Indian military in South Africa. And these individuals were brought in 1879, and they basically worked as sentries, and they guarded, state institutions and granaries and so forth. If you look at the back, you see the 4 gentlemen with turbans. They all have a steel band around their arm. And if you look at the second Indian from the left, he's got a musket in his hand. Okay. The second notable involvement was in the Anglo-Boer War. And this is Mahatma Gandhi stretcher bearers, and they were, the contraption they're carrying was called a dooli, and they would carry the wounded soldiers up to 20 kilometers from the battlefield to the hospital. As you can see, this picture is a picture of Mahatma Gandhi sitting in the middle, and together with his stretcher bearers. The white gentleman sitting next to him with his face facing to the left, that is Dr. Booth, who actually initiated the concept of stretcher bearers. These are the Indian cavalry soldiers that came down from India. And as Mr. Ganesh said earlier, they were here to work as auxiliaries. Although they were fully fledged soldiers, they worked as auxiliaries looking after the horses and so forth. They're all carrying Martini Henry rifles. And if you look at the gentleman standing to the extreme left, he's actually a white gentleman. He's most probably a sergeant or so, and he's actually wearing a turban. Although it was said to be a white man's war between the Boers and the British, there were 2 incidents where Indian soldiers actually partook in the battle. One was Mr. Umir Singh, I think it was. He entered a house where there were Boer soldiers, and he was confronted by a Boer, and using his sword, he decapitated the Boer soldier. The second incident was, I think it was Sais Dostot Muhammad, who accompanied his officer, who was a white officer, Lieutenant Peterson, in the battle. They charged the Boer line while the Boers fired upon them. And on the retreat, they noticed one of the white soldiers' horse was shot. And these, so the lieutenant went towards the soldier to get him off onto his horse to get him out. And the orderly, who was Mr. Dostot, also followed him. And both of them got the got the soldier onto the lieutenant's horse. And although the lieutenant told Dostot to leave the battlefield because there were about 150 yards from the Boers who were firing upon them, he refused until the soldier was safely on the horse. Then they both rode out. Lieutenant Peterson was awarded the Victorian Cross, and the Sais Dostot received the Order of Merit, which is also a bravery medal, but a lower class of bravery medals. This is Captain V.L. Desai. He was a volunteer. He actually left India to study medicine in the UK, and he came to South Africa to do his internship in the Cape Colony. And then when the war broke out, he actually joined the military service, and he started to work as an orthopedic surgeon. There's a perception that Indians held all the low-ranking roles and holding the low ranks, with Mahatma Gandhi being the highest ranking officer, being a warrant officer. But this is proof that Captain Desai was actually a medical doctor, and he held a very prestigious post in the medical corps. This is Mr. Prabhu Singh. Mr. Prabhu Singh volunteered his services in the military, and he was turned down by the British. So what he did was, when at the battle of when Ladysmith came under siege, he would stand with his umbrella and his flag on stores, when stores could be anything, any type of goods. And whenever you would see the cannon, a smoke coming out of the cannon or a flash coming from a cannon of the Boers in the hills, he would ring a bell and he would wave his flag. And that would get the attention of the guy in the church tower would ring the big bell. And that will allow people to scurry and take cover. And through that, he saved a lot of people's lives. The other involvement in the military was the Indian traders, like Mr. Haji. They would collect funds from the public, from the Indian community, and they would offer it to and donate it towards the widow fund. And this was all done to get support from the British and to prove that they are loyal citizens to the British Empire. The Indians were always split. There was one group always opposing and the one group always trying to take the other route of trying to win favor. Sorry. And there's another group of Indians that the Indian traders that came to Natal, with the British imposing harsh laws onto these traders because they took a huge stake of the economy. It forced many of them to move inland from Natal into the Transvaal, and these traders set up business there. And when the war broke out, these Indian traders actually started to contribute money towards the Boers to fight the British, because the British occupied India and also oppressed the Indians in Natal. There's a few cases that's recorded and where land was actually transferred to Indians after the war by Paul Kruger. This is the Indian War Memorial that is built in Observatory. The organization I work with actually actually started off because of this monument. We wanted to create a platform so we can engage the municipality to do something. It's built in a very remote part of the city, and the person who works as a deputy director there, he wrote an article on this and he calls it the Forgotten Monument. Unfortunately, he's also the individual who's opposing development of the area where you can build access to it. Initially, we wanted to relocate it, but it's very dangerous to relocate it because the monument is very fragile. We had architects look at it and unfortunately we can't move it. So we're still meeting with the city to see if we can develop that area and have a more easable access to it. In the picture, you'll see Mr. Dad Naidu. His initials is DAD. He's an ex-Navy chef. And then on the right-hand side is Mr. Leon Subin, also of the South African Indian Legion. Sorry, excuse me. World War I, with the stretcher bearers, closing down, and after the Boer War, they were resurrected again in World War I by the Indian community, and the Indian community actually contributed money to actually fit them out in uniform so they can go off to war. And this was all trying to prove to the white South Africans that Indians were loyal citizens. This is called a dead man's penny. It's actually about 8 to 10 centimeters in diameter. This was issued to a gentleman called Frank Augustine, who's an Indian. Many of the Indians that came from India, they've adopted Christianity, and then they changed their names as well. So Mr. Frank Augustine, he passed away due to disease during the First World War, and his family members who I'm in contact with is now in possession of this dead man's penny. Sadly, there was only a few Indians that died in the First World War, I think about 20 or so, maybe less, and then also about 20 or so in the Second World War. This family has lost Frank Augustine in the First World War, who was the older brother, and they lost a younger brother in the Second World War, who's called Donald Augustine. Okay, this is the Second World War, the involvement of Indians. Initially, they opened up, the Indian politicians started to also try to win the favor of the government by recruiting Indians to serve in the military. While there was one group trying to recruit members to serve in the military, there was another group of politicians that actually, objecting to Indians serving in the military. And due to the very low turnout, they established the Indian Service Corps. And as I said, due to the low turnout, they had to amalgamate with the Malay Corps, which was a group of people from Malaysia that also, like the Indians, settled in South Africa in the Cape, in the Western Cape. And in the middle, sitting down, is Mr. Morgas, Sergeant Morgas, and on the left is Mr. James. This is the first Indian that was recruited, and that is Sergeant Maraj. Sergeant Maraj actually holds the service number M10001. He was a priest and he was a greengrocer, and he was recruited by the Defense Force at the age of 47, which is quite old for a person to join the military. And he became more on the administration side. This is Mr. George Moodley. Mr. George Moodley served with the Indian Malay Corps. He was at Tobruk, and he was captured. He was also shot in the thigh and also ended up with shrapnel in his leg from aircraft bombs. When he was captured, he was taken to France, Germany, and Italy to work as a prisoner of war. This is very interesting. This is Mr. Dharma Gordin. Mr. Dharma Gordin, he went to study, he was from the KwaZulu-Natal region, and he went to study medicine in India. And when the war broke out, he signed up in the Indian Air Force as a pilot. Back then, you couldn't serve as a pilot or even join the Air Force, being a person of color. So sadly, he passed away in a plane crash. And also, what's notable is his father was the only Indian allowed to sell horses to the British during the Anglo-Boer War.
Mr. Salvan, please make your closing comments.
There we go. Very quickly. Okay, these are Indians from the Indian Army that were brought to South Africa. Okay, this is the first pilot, the Indian pilot. On the right is Mr. Vino Egambaram, and I was just with him on the weekend. He was the first guy, and he did his pilot training during apartheid in the late 80s, which was a very difficult time. He left service, obviously due to reasons. The Air Force was still very white, and there was still a lot of discrimination with regards to black and white soldiers. And just to take it back very quickly to where we're sitting today, we're still having the race quotas that actually hampers the growth of Indians in the military. We've also had cases where senior people have been moved out of positions to make way for the majority, and sadly, this is still the case. And sorry, I'm going to cut it very short. There were Indians also involved right now, but all there's opportunity to become fighter pilots and so forth, but numbers are very limited. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mr. Salvan. We really appreciate your grounding your presentation history. We really appreciate your bringing it to a close when you did. This was quite interesting. So now we know the background of that, of the military, the South African military. And although there are indeed some Indians certainly underrepresented. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are unable to get Professor Mars. But I do have her presentation, and what I want to do in all fairness, this will stop others screen sharing. Yes. So what I want to do is I'm going to try to just show you two of her slides. Can anybody, Shakir, could you please confirm that you are seeing Professor Ma's presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Diversity in the Guyana Police Force. Yes.
Right. Excuse me. So her conclusion, excuse me.
If you go back to the first slide, I will point out the Indian commissioner or former commissioner of police, Silal Prasad.
Oh, the first slide here.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
This one here, second, right, that's the one. So you're right, and then second from the right, seated. This is,
Second from the right, seated.
yeah, so this is right here.
Yeah.
Is it here, Silal Prasad? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. So what she pointed out was the racial distribution of the population of Guyana. And in 1980, we are seeing considerably more East Indians in the population. That was already discussed, I think. But I just want to come down to her conclusion. So she would have quoted from a particular case, and what she is saying here, the fact that the underrepresented group, let me just get rid of this. Okay, the fact that the underrepresented group, East Indians, comprises the numerical majority of the population makes a stronger case than in this particular legal case for the use of race as a factor in employment decisions. She's saying there is urgency in correcting the racial imbalance in the police force. So, okay, we are confirming there's a racial imbalance in the Guyanese police force, and it should be corrected according to Professor Mars in the interest of reducing the fear and distrust of police that currently persists among the East Indian population that was on full display during recent protest action on the East Coast. In addition to the steps already taken as required by the Disciplined Forces Commission 2004, in the interest of creating a truly inclusive society, a race-conscious employment process should be applied for at least the next 25 years in the interest of promoting social cohesion and ethnic diversity in the Guyana police force. So we have the position of Professor Mars there in regard to our topic for today. And I would like to thank everyone for sharing. Let me just stop. So it's been a very interesting set of presentations, I have to say. And thank you so much to all of our speakers for your time, your sacrifice, your effort, and your availability. I just want to remind everybody that today's program has been recorded live. It will be uploaded later on our YouTube channel. And at this point in time, I want to open the floor to questions, comments, and any contributions that you all would have. Please raise your electronic hand in the reactions button. And so I will call upon you to ask your questions. Is there anyone who wants to pose a question? Okay, Daniel Gibran, go ahead, please.
This is addressed to Professor George Dans. I know you did not serve in the Guyana Defense Force, so you do not have a granular perspective. I know you did your doctoral work on the Guyana Defense Force or the armed forces in Guyana, if I recall correctly. When the SSU was formed in late 1964, early 1965, Mr. Forbes Burnham, who was premier at the time, as Guyana was not an independent country at that time, not until 1966, he specifically asked or requested or wanted a Guyanese who would have graduated from the Royal Academy, which is commonly known as Sandhurst. And the only one who was available at the time was serving with the Jamaica Regiment. And that was Major Raymond Sattar, who is East Indian. So Sattar came, and he was the head of the SSU, the Special Service Unit, for the whole of 1965, and going on. And by the time at the end of the year, 1965, the SSU was disbanded, and the GDF was formed. The first batch of recruits, 32 men from Civilian Street, who joined the Guyana Defense Force and were accepted on the 10th of January, 1966. I was one of those. I know Major Sattar personally. He recruited me in spite of what the Chief of Staff, Colonel Ronald Pope from the British Army was saying, that I should return to my teaching job and not join the Defense Force. But Major Sattar knew me from before during SSU time. And he said, no, this is someone we want. Anyway, but you mentioned, Professor Dans, that many of the officers who were trained, no officer was trained overseas during the SSU time. It was during the formation, the early formation days of the Guyana Defense Force, that a number of individuals, they didn't go to Sandhurst. They went to Mons Officer Cadet School, which was just 6 months. There were 2 officers a few years later. That was Fabian Liverpool, and he retired as Colonel Liverpool. And this gentleman, Haydock West, who stayed back after his training and spent 6 months with the sappers or the engineering battalion of the British Army. So when, after his return, he was in charge of forming the sappers unit or the engineering unit of the Guyana Defense Force. There were 2 individuals who received scholarships, and they went to West Point, and they spent 4 years. And one was East Indian. He's still alive. The other gentleman, I think he died. But both of them didn't last long. They left out of sheer frustration because they were discriminated against, not on the basis of race, but because they went to West Point, came back with their first degree. And these, the officers in the Guyana Defense Force didn't take too much of a liking for these two gentlemen. They came in as second lieutenants, and they were treated very, very badly. I left the Guyana Defense Force on the 30th of March, 1970.
Mr. Gibran, and how long were you there?
4 years, 3 months, 3 weeks.
Okay, all right. Do you have a direct question for Professor Dans?
Well, I am just correcting him. You asked for statements as well. I think Professor Dans has a very good grasp of the police formation, etc., more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Dans, would you like to respond?
Sure. I thank Daniel for his historical knowledge and for sharing that with us. I certainly didn't have the kind of time to develop a narrative on the SSU, which is of serious importance in terms of the broader topic. But Daniel is right, and what occurred to me when I looked at it is that the coming together of equal numbers of Indians and Blacks to form the SSU led to a rise in status of that organization,
yes,
and a rise in status of the soon-to-be formed Guyana Defense Force. And there were some exceptionally fine officers of both races among some of the Indians. You mentioned Major Sattar, and people like General Joe Singh.
Not really.
Yeah, exceptionally
We can
fine.
debate that.
Right. And there was not a question about whether Indians can serve in the military. And we've seen this all across the diaspora, that they were good soldiers, good officers. So, yep, I thoroughly agreed with you. As I said, I had 12 minutes to make my presentation. At least this is what I was told. And had I had more time, I could have brought more to the table. But thank you.
Mr. Dance, we really appreciate all that you've shared. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I want to ask a question of Professor Naidu, and that relates to the information. Okay, Varan is there. Varan, just give me 1 second, please. Professor Naidu, you mentioned that Indo-Fijian, sorry. The peacekeeping force was invited to recruit many more women. And my question to you is this: how many Indo-Fijian women, if any at all, applied for recruitment to that peacekeeping force?
Thank you for that question, Chair. We don't have the data on that because generally speaking, as I was saying, the current government follows an ethnically blind policy. But
Yes,
from the
yes.
images,
Check your WhatsApp message.
Sorry, sir, go ahead, please.
from the images of the people who turned up to be recruited, they were predominantly indigenous Fijian.
Predominantly Indo-Fijians?
Indigenous,
right,
Fijians.
okay, ethnic
Or native
Fijians.
Fijians, yeah.
Right. Secondly, what I'm wondering, you said only 15 Fijian Indians were in the army in 2007. It's possible that the numbers have not increased dramatically. But my question is, of those Indo-Fijians, the minority who are in the army and the police force and all that sort of thing, how are they treated by members of the public? Are members of the public receptive to them, or are they treated poorly in the execution of their duties?
Thank you very much. I think, generally speaking, they're extremely well regarded and respected, both in the police force and in the military. There are issues about the police force in terms of the efficiency and competence, in Fiji society. But with respect to individual police officers, members of the police force and the military, they enjoy high status and respect from the wider community, as well as Indo-Fijians in particular.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for clearing that up.
Thank
you. Let's invite for interesting now. Varan, go ahead, please. You have a question?
Good evening, everyone. No, just a comment. In Selvin, in his picture, correctly identified a lot of the soldiers with turbans and bangles. They were known as Sikhs. The rest of the pictures depict a lot of Rajasthani soldiers that came from Rajasthan and UP into South Africa and fought for the South African Defense Force at that time. Just a comment in terms of when Gandhi was here, and of course while we all fought the British for for independence, Subhash Chandra Bose and others took a different path. But the British recognized the Sikh soldiers as being loyal and very good fighters, and used them in different countries in the diaspora, like in Hong Kong. They were used, solely Sikhs were used to defend the ammunition dumps that had to be protected. On a lighter note, a relative of mine who was in the army, who was awarded a medal for bravery, because in North Africa, he weren't allowed to fight, but he was driving an ammo truck across the desert area while under heavy fire. And the truck supposedly broke down, and he was seen going under the truck. And after 20 minutes, getting to the truck, starting it, and bringing it to safety. Well, that was the story, and he got the medal. When he came home, the real story was he was so scared while crossing the desert. He went under the truck in fear. And after the shelling stopped, he got into the truck and came home. And he got a medal for that. But, that's a real story. On a lighter note, thank you. Great presentation.
For sharing that, Baran. I'm sure it happens from time to time. And as we are saying that, we have with us Peter Ramrika in the audience, who is a former military officer. Mr. Ramrika, would you mind sharing with us what your personal experiences have been? Please unmute.
Thank you very much. Good evening, good day, and good morning. I was just struck, about the similarity of the presentations, because I served in the Air Force from 1961 to 1970. But what I feel, one of the lack of incentive of people of Indian ethnic race joining the military is because it's not seen as an opportunity. And I just wondered whether, as a point of note, we should put forward a view that people of Indian ethnicity perhaps should be encouraged to seek scholarships from the government and apply to get into the military through that route, so that there is seen as an opportunity, and their parents and so on would see that it's not a dead-end job. Also, as Guyana is on the cusp of development, there might be more opportunities in the Air Force. The Army is historically felt to be Afro-Guyanese territory, although we have heard comments about a few Indians. But I think that it's because of the lack of opportunity, which would overcome the physical barriers which some have highlighted. And I think that if it's seen as a way of bringing talent into the military, it would be a good balancing, because the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, certainly in Britain and in the developing world, is seen as a way of getting into a proper professional career. And I think not a lot has been highlighted in those areas. But overall, a wonderful presentations in spite of all the difficulties with the IT, and congratulations to you, Chair, as you try to control that. But it is a very, very interesting topic, and I hope we can, in addition to giving our thoughts, start a movement where the governments of certainly Trinidad and Guyana could take note of one of the serious concerns as we go forward as nations, where you have a disparity in the armed services. Fortunately, we haven't had any attempt to change government in our area through ethnicity loyalty, but that's a worry. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing that, Mr. Ramrika, and thank you for your suggestion. I want to ask Mr. Derek Davey as well, who is a former military officer, to share his experiences. Mr. Davey? Can you unmute your mic, please? Okay, I'm not hearing him, and I am not seeing him making any attempts to unmute. We have former President Donald Ramuta with us. President Ramuta, would you like to say something? Would you like to?
Just briefly. I think I listened to some of the presentations, and I think there's a lot of similarities with the experiences of Indians in the different parts of the world. But in Guyana, there had been another aspect of it. There was the deliberate attempt in Guyana to keep Indians out of the armed forces, largely because the Indians were what was the most important part of the economy at that time in the sugar industry. And because the Indians were there, it was not, the British did everything to try to prevent them from being in the armed forces, because they were probably worried that they might find sympathy with the condition of the working class there and find sympathy with their struggles. So they were deliberately kept out. And then, from 1950, middle of the 1950s, with the split of the PPP, race was used as a weapon in our politics, completely used. And the PNC was created as a political party to fight against independence, to fight against the national movement at the time. And the only way they could have organized any type of mass support was by the use of race. And they managed to succeed in getting into the government in 1964. And the government, the Indians were further kept out of the military by then. Those who were there were pushed out, like Asadi Shuf and Sattar and many others. But so you have that problem too. And one of the difficulties in our country, while these things still persist, is the fact that we have had a change in our political and electoral system from first past the post to PR in 1964. And it was a deliberate attempt for two reasons. One was to get rid of Jagan, and the second reason was to keep the races divided, because under the PR system, political parties tend to organize on the basis of race and religion and other small interests to get into the government. And PR encourages fragmentation in the political system. And the British wanted weak, and the Americans wanted weak governments in our country. And that is why they perpetuated with the PR system. What happened, though, that they didn't completely calculate for, is that the PNC began to rig the elections. So they didn't get the type of coalition governments that they had hoped to get, where they will control everything because of weak government. But that is now coming. Unless we change our political system, particularly at this point in time when we have found oil and our economy is becoming an oil economy, it will be in the interest of the foreigners to try to keep our country with weak governments, and they will try to organize to not have strong government or one party in government for that matter. And if you look at the last election, 13 parties contested the elections. And in the last two elections, the government was running with a majority of one. And that to my mind, in another one or two elections, we will have weak governments unless we change the system and force the political parties to deal on the first past the post with more national issues. And then because of that, I think it will remove the fear in some places of having Indians in the armed forces, because many Afro-Guyanese might have a fear that they're out of government. That's how they're encouraged to think, that they're out of government, and therefore their power could be in the armed forces. To remove that is to force political parties to take national positions. And the only way we can do that is by going back to the first past the post system. Because in 1961 elections, one of the reasons that we have the PR system too, there were 4 seats in the constituency systems where the PPP won under Chetty Jagan, where the majority of the electorate were Afro-Guyanese. So what was being noticed was that the PPP was being able to well back the people together in a national government. And that is why they couldn't give the PPP time, and they organized the riots in our country, which we are still suffering from to this day. So I would say, while the experiences are generally similar, And I think it's largely because Indians went to the different colonies late, maybe, than the other forces within the society. And in many cases, they were at the heart of the economy. In Fiji, they were in sugar. Guyana, they were in sugar. Trinidad, they were in sugar. I think in Suriname, it was the same thing too. And that is why they have been discouraged from getting into the force. And in some cases, they lost interest. And I think we have to find some system to build back the interest and make the military a career for them as well. So that is what would be my only contribution at this point in time.
Yeah, thank you very much. The level of interest among Indians certainly need to increase if it is that the situation is to right itself at any point in time. So thank you so much for sharing that. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everyone for participating today, and I really, really appreciate all of our speakers for all the work that you've done in presenting, all the information that you've shared with us. It certainly has been a very enlightening day. So I'll now pass you over to our chair, Shakira Mohammed. Thanks once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalma, for being a wonderful moderator once again. And thank you all for your support and your encouragement throughout the technical difficulties that we experienced. Remember also that we are still looking for more Indian elders over 80 years old to interview live next month again for part 2 of that very interesting series. We are asking their children and grandchildren to help us in this oral history project. And thank you all for taking the time to participate. Thank you especially to the speakers. As I've said before, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. And you can feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books and your reports. Remember that we are asking you to kindly give us your suggestions as well as donations, and you can contact Dr. Mahabir for further details. Thank you to the advisory and planning team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir. And thank you also to our IT manager behind the scenes, even though he was having some issues today. So Ravin Ramsingh, thank you. And he has been recording the program and will edit and upload it to our website and to YouTube permanently for posterity. Our topic next Sunday will be the influence of astrology on Indian culture and traditions. So please like, share, and follow our Facebook page. I am Shakira Mohammed of Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye, and may God bless you all. Dhanyavad.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shalima. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Mahabir.
you very much. Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful. Sorry about the technology.
Okay.
Despite the glitches, I think we learned something today.
Sure,
Yes.
sure.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
Thank
Naren.
you. Bye.
Thank you, Vijay and others.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Dr. Kumar. Mahabir.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So we'll be in touch every Sunday. We have different topics.
Yes.
So join us again. Anybody has anything to add before we finally close?
Excuse me 1 second, please. Dr. Mahabir, we need to stop recording.
Ravin will stop in a short while. He's probably still having the difficulties. I'm gonna call him. But we can talk. He will edit.
You can continue. I will call him. It's okay.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I please take leave of the meeting? I've got to prepare for an early morning.
Yes, I know it's late. Thank you.
Yeah, it's getting on to
South Africa.
20 past 11 at night.
Thank you very much,
South
Naren.
Africa.
We always
Yeah.
appreciate your being here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Bye.
Dr. Mahabir, before everyone leaves, hopefully you will edit out this part. I
Sure.
just wanted to add that I teach a class called Strategic Communication. I have 26 students at the University of Guyana, and about 12 of them are from the police and the army. And they are 2 high-ranking officers in both the army and the police who are doing research on the same topic. And they have different problem statements, different methodologies, but they are both doing research in it, and it will take a year, but I just wanted to add that these young officers are thinking along the same lines, and they're looking at ways and means after the research to design strategic communication programs that are targeted towards addressing such problems. Well, this particular problem.
Thank you. Anybody again wants to say something before we finally close? No? Okay, so we close now, Shalima.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get Robin.
Yeah,
You all.
I would go on the site and close it down meanwhile.
Okay, very well. Yeah, so hopefully we will be able to get the edited version up on YouTube for you all to view without as many glitches. Thanks again for being here. Really look forward to seeing you all next week as well. Take care.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Bye, Kogi. I know it's late.